back to Corporate Law Lab. I'm your host, Neil Taylor, Director of the Corporate Law Center at the University of Cincinnati. I'm joined today by my co-host, Brett Blair, a third-year student who's been a corporate law fellow for his whole tenure here, is about to graduate and join Calfee, Halter, and Griswold. Is that right?
Yes.
And good thing I got it named right, because our guest today is Patrick Hayes of Calfee. Welcome, Patrick.
Very glad to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
So you went to UC Law School. Before that, Notre Dame. Here's my obnoxious question. Why did you choose the school with the second best football program in Indiana?
Ooh, I like it. That's good. That's a good jab. I like that. You know,
I got my one chance.
it is crazy to think about. And what an incredible turnaround for IU football that was much maligned for so many years. Yeah, look, I have no excuses to offer other than we got to do better next year. So we're gearing up for 26.
All right. Well, I hope we see you in the playoffs next year and that we're both there this time and you don't get shuffled off like this year.
Deal. That sounds like a plan.
You can't complain anymore about Miami getting in ahead of you, given what they did afterwards.
I could still offer a few complaints, but we can save that for a different podcast.
And by the way, your coach did pick Miami in college. Yeah. So,
yeah.
And I don't think Miami's going to give you any breaks in the fall. Okay, before we turn this into a pure sports cast, what did you major in at Notre Dame?
I was an English major. And actually, even before that, I had transferred over to Notre Dame my junior year, which was really the last possible opportunity that Notre Dame will allow you to transfer. Before that, I was a business major and an English double major at John Carroll University, where I played football for a couple years. And then when I got over to Notre Dame, not all of my credits came over. And it was a decision of, hey, do you want to still be a double major or do you want to graduate on time? And I was much more attracted to English and literature and other stuff. So that was the path. And so when I got to Notre Dame, I focused on English and graduated from there in 2005.
But you'd had enough business classes so that when you got into private practice, you knew the debits were on the left and things like that.
I would say yes to that. I would definitely say that my business acumen really got upgraded ultimately through my work experience and professional experience later on. I did take some business classes. I had a little bit of a foundation there, but actually UC Law School is, I would say, one of the places where I really upped my game. Professor Paul Caron and his tax class was like, absolutely a master class in starting to get up to speed on the corporate law aspects.
Yeah, he joined right as I was leaving. I missed Professor Caron, but I've heard amazing things about him. He's dean of Pepperdine now?
Yeah.
Did you know that you wanted to go to law school when you were an undergrad, or how did going to law school come about?
Yeah, when I set off to go to college, and then even in the midst of most of my college tenure, it wasn't really something that was on the radar. I mean, ultimately, my father had passed when I was younger, when I was in high school, and I became really close with his brother, my uncle, who was an attorney and had worked here in Cincinnati for a long time over at Keating Muth and Camp, Tom Hayes, and he had actually gone with Bill Keating Sr. when he went to Washington and worked in Congress for a while. And in talking with him, one of the things that he really kind of ultimately sold me on, or that I became really attracted to, is the versatility of a career in law and all the different avenues that it can help open up for you. And so, ultimately, I didn't exactly know what I wanted to do. I had transferred from a D3 school where I was playing a sport over to Notre Dame and was still trying to find my way. And the idea of having a degree where I could continue my education, but have a lot of versatility and ultimately figuring out what I wanted, which path I wanted to choose, was something that was really attractive to me.
So when you arrived at law school, you didn't have a particular path in mind?
No, I did not. I mean, I had actually thought that one of the things, even coming out of undergrad, I was thinking about was I still was attracted towards more of a career in business. I mean, I mentioned that I had originally been a double business and English major. And I thought, well, if I go to law school and I learn how to write really well, if I learn how to communicate really well, right, both verbally and on paper, that's going to set me up for success, even in the business world, because just like everywhere else, they need people that can think critically and that can be able to communicate really, really well. And so I think that was kind of some of the rationale behind that decision.
How do you describe your practice right now, shorthand? Because it seems rather diverse.
Yeah, that's a great question to ask. I look at myself almost like a general counsel of, you know what? I'm going to reframe that a little bit. I think of myself as a strategic partner for people that want to build their own business, but that for those folks that have just happened to, for their profession, gone down the path of being a financial advisor. What's really cool about the job that I get to do now is I'm often working with folks that are more entrepreneurial in nature, right? So I have clients right now that are investment advisors attached to major Fortune 100 and Fortune 250 and Fortune 500 companies. And, they've got 120 or 150 billion in assets under management. But most of my clients aren't like that ilk. Most of my clients are the folks that are, um, they're leaving a big wirehouse. And when I say wirehouse, I mean like a JP Morgan, excuse me, a Wells Fargo, Northwestern Mutual, some of these other really big shops out there. And those shops do great work. I'm not here to denigrate anything about those shops in particular, but these folks are more entrepreneurial in nature. They've built a practice on their own, and now they want to go hang their own shingle in the financial, in the investment advisor space. What's great for them is like I can help them with every part of that process and really be their trusted partner through it, right? I can help them get their entity set up. I can help them get registered with whatever either state or federal authority that they need to. I can build all of their original kind of compliance program documents or contracts or draft the regulatory filings. And then if they would like, I can help them with any of their ongoing needs, right? And so what's been really cool about that aspect of the practice is a lot of the clients I went in-house for in the middle part of my career for a little bit and then went back out into private practice in 2017. Most of my clients that I started working with in 2017 are still my clients today. And that's like really cool to see because you like become part of their family. Like you become part of you're in their circle, right? Like you're in their tribe. And that's really, really cool because you really do become kind of like a trusted partner for them. And that's the juice, man. That's the stuff that really gets you out of bed and excited to come to work every day.
How hard was it to go from being in-house back into private practice? Because you see a few people make that move, but it's more rare. Usually, once you leave private practice, you put the keeping track of your life in 6-minute increments down and never pick it up again.
You could not be more spot on there. Like, the timekeeping aspect of going back out into private practice is definitely one of the things that I wasn't looking forward to when I made that decision. My career path is driven by both external factors in a couple of different key areas. So I graduated in '08. The recession had started. In fact, the firm that I had a job lined up with at the time, unfortunately, they were bleeding. And they ultimately, a week before finals, 3 all year, were like, hey, we're not going to be able to bring you on. Right. And that's, it's hard. Right.
Yeah.
It's hard. So, but it was, that firm was incredible. I have nothing but respect for that firm. And ultimately, I was one of the fortunate ones. I still got a hit and started working at Voorhees here in Cincinnati. And they had a need in their litigation area. And so that was where I went. And I tell people all the time, I still really, really, really appreciated that I got about 5 years of experience doing litigation work before I went into the corporate law side. And that's also kind of a weird shift because most people pick a path early on and tend to stick with it. I find it incredibly useful. Like now, when I have clients that are going through an SEC examination, or maybe they're even dealing with enforcement, knock on wood, that doesn't happen often. The ability to do witness prep, the ability to like organize in an intense way, major document production levels and like other stuff like that is so helpful with kind of where my ultimate practice area kind of came into focus. But then I went from there, I took an in-house job and that was really fantastic training. Honestly, that was, I was lucky enough, I got to work here in town at Fort Washington Investment Advisors, which is a part of the Western and Southern Financial Group. It's a fantastic organization. And the training I got at Fort Washington was, incredible and really multifaceted. And if it wasn't for that training itself, I don't know that I would have had the ability to go back out into private practice, right? But thankfully, my role inside of Fort Washington at the time really allowed me to focus on all aspects of the investment management space. So, public equities and mutual funds and fixed income and private funds. And then also that's more on the institutional side. And then on the private kind of wealth management side, it was with the private client group and financial planning. So I got this really wide aperture of experience, and I was able to really leverage that. And then ultimately, that was able to put me in a position where I can go back into the consulting side. I can go back into the legal counsel side, because no matter what client comes my way, I'm going to feel prepared, like I can handle that specific matter or the challenge associated with
I think the litigation background, and I mean, I was describing to the students yesterday for externships, you can look at different things. You can rule out things by trying them. You can find things that you didn't know you'd like by trying them, and then you can end up with a weird career like mine of 10 years as a litigator and 20 as a corporate lawyer. But if you've got that litigation background, I was having a conversation with the guy I know from Morgan Lewis the other day, and he was talking about how he'd done some litigation. He's a deal lawyer.
Yeah.
And he had an associate say to him once, "Well, if that happens, we'll just enforce, go get specific performance because it's in the contract."
Yeah,
And
sure, right.
and you laugh because
Yeah.
like if you're not a litigator knows getting specific performance is just not a thing you go just do.
Correct. Yeah,
Right?
correct. Yeah, no, that's exactly right. It's like theory versus, the practical nature of it. And I loved how you just framed how people can ultimately find their practice. In fact, so I was fortunate enough, I got to teach a couple classes up here at UC. This is earlier before I had the second and third kiddo, and time constraints were a little tighter. But one of the things that I would talk to my students about, because I literally lived this experience, and it sounds like you in a very similar way, finding the right, like I felt like in law school, like part of me had failed when I left law school because I didn't know exactly what I wanted to do. Why don't I have the practice area figured out that I want to do long term, and why haven't I found that job that's in that area to begin with? And man, like I couldn't have been more wrong just in thinking about, I had been trained up really, really well. I've been able to think critically, and ultimately finding the right career path, I think in a lot of ways is a lot more like making a sculpture than it is like drawing a painting. Because it's like a sculpture in that like you often are doing new things and trying new areas, and you chip away at the ones that you don't like. And then ultimately what you're left with is this beautiful sculpture after you've chipped away all the stuff that you know that you don't want to do. Versus like when you start, doing a painting in your mind's eye, you kind of already know what the finished product is going to look like. And so for anybody out there that might be listening to this podcast that thinks, gosh, I don't know what the heck I want to do with my career yet, where do I go? I think that's okay, because you haven't tried some of those other practice areas, and ultimately you'll be able to kind of narrow it down.
When I first did any work in compliance, I would go to conferences like, it was then called the American Society of Corporate Secretaries, dating myself. And I would say, I'm working at Avnet on compliance. And then they would start chattering to me about securities compliance, because at the time, that's what compliance was. Has it now flipped on its head that when you say you do compliance work, people think you're doing the kind of compliance work that I was doing, investigating sexual harassment and whatever else?
I do think so. Compliance is such a wide topic area.
Right.
Exactly to your point. I think there are a lot of folks out there when they hear compliance, a lot of people's brains goes towards that kind of that side. I think healthcare is another big area that people are often like, but corporate compliance, I think, is probably still, I'd say, what people think of initially. And then I have to clarify, well, I'm kind of in that realm, but more specific to kind of securities regulations. And specifically, I tell everybody the best part about my practice now, man, I only have to know like 4 statutes. It's great. Like I don't have to know anything. It's awesome. The Advisors Act, the Company Act, Securities Act, and Exchange Act. Like that's it. That's the list, And so that's really cool, because what I figured out along the way in coming into the area of securities compliance is that there are people that are wonderful generalists out there and that can do a lot of different things. And while I certainly consider myself to have a little bit of knowledge in a lot of areas, I really love having a deep expertise in one area. And that's something that's different depending on what type of attorney and counselor you ultimately want to be. But that's what I love, is that like you get to run deep on these 4 statutes and know them in and out. And that I think is really cool.
I can't wait to bookend this episode with the one we just did, where I was talking with another generalist about how much we need experts like you, and also need to not pretend that we can just jump right in and do what you do, because you've got a knowledge of those four acts that none of us will ever approach.
Yeah.
Well, Brett will approach because you're about to turn him into.
Yeah, that's right. Exactly.
Take it away, Brett. Go ahead.
You touched on kind of the broad range of clients that you service with your practice. Could you speak to us a little bit about what they have in common, kind of how you approach tailoring your advice and your kind of your service of those clients through your practice?
Yeah. So it's a great question. And ultimately, the approach that I take with them is honestly like it starts, and I use this term very intentionally. People often refer to attorneys as counselors, right? Another term of art that I would say you hear a lot is advocate. When I started my career, I was more on the advocacy side, right? I was a litigator. I was typically responding to a problem that had happened, and then was going to ultimately meet with that client and try to advance their best interest, right? Counselors are different, right? Counselors are often working behind the scenes, and you're often part of that planning stage. You're often meeting with C-suite or the people that, the entrepreneurs, the other folks, to help them. I want to understand what's their desired goal. Like the first thing I want to do is like, where do you want to land, right? Like I understand you're here right now. Where is it that you want to land? And not just in 1 year, 2 years, but what about in 5 years? What about in 10 years? Because then we can set, by having that bogey in place, I can set a course for them where we're going to be able to really work well together. I'm going to be able to get them set up exactly like they want to be, so that at every step of the way, while they're building their business, while they're meeting with clients, while they're running on investments, while they're finding new opportunities, while they're attracting talent, about the legal or compliance side at all, right? I take that burden completely away from them in a way that is super meaningful for them as entrepreneurs to be able to build their business. That's what's so cool. Like these people want to live, they've got this dream. I didn't even know this practice area existed in law school, which is another, kind of funny story of coming into it. But like now that I'm in it and I get to do stuff like that, where it's really my number one goal when I first meet with a client, and the thing they have in common across all of them, no matter their size, is I just want to know, okay, what is the desired landing spot here? And then I can help them chart a course to make sure that we get there.
So you mentioned that you joined private practice again in 2017, and I believe you joined Calfee in 2019. Is that correct?
Yep.
Could you talk to us a little bit about how joining the firm has shaped the trajectory of your career thereafter, and kind of how the firm culture has helped you grow your practice area?
Yeah. And so, law firms, and they're built in all different ways, right? One of the things that was unique about Calfee, and that I think is also just a hallmark specifically of kind of our investment management practice now that we are continuing to build inside of the firm, I realized early on, and this actually started back when I was in-house, right? So I'm at Fort Washington. At the time, I was reporting directly up to the chief compliance officer inside of Fort Washington, but I had a kind of a dotted line, or kind of a really strong connection at the same time to the general counsel's office of the Western Southern Financial Group. And I got to see firsthand this blend, this really cool crossover, between law and compliance. And so as a result of that, I saw, look, there are lots of different elements, or lots of different ways where those two things intersect, and there's really good crossover and they're completely aligned. But there are some instances where something may be technically legal, but it may not be something that, from a compliance standpoint, from a risk standpoint, which again is a little bit different, that you want to really engage in. And so I got to see that delineation in a really meaningful way. And so then when I got out into private practice, and then ultimately was making the move over to Calfee, one of the things that I loved is that Calfee had other businesses at the time, including its government relations practice, that was already used to or familiar with attracting non-attorney professional talent. And I knew that for me to be able to provide and build the best investment management practice that I could, that I was really going to have to lean on that and ultimately try to attract that same type of talent. So on my team right now, in addition to a couple other attorneys, right, I have a director of ops, right? I have a woman who she's a CFA level 2 and used to run a trading desk. I have another woman who's got their CIPP privacy designation. Another person who used to be the office manager for a different office, and just her organizational and managerial skills are invaluable, right? But those are all non-attorneys, right? Which isn't, again, you think of a law firm, we're just going to try to attract attorneys here. I knew that in order for me to build out the best practice that I could, I wanted to bring in that non-attorney professional talent. That was something that Calfee was familiar with. And it continues to be, I would say, a hallmark of our practice, today. We think in the IM practice at Calfee and working with our clients, we don't just want to be able to tell them whether or not they can do something. We want to be able to tell them whether or not they should. And if they are going to do it, what's the best practice on how to execute it?
Great. So kind of touching on that point of having a team of both lawyers and non-lawyers, could you talk to us a little bit about the day-to-day balance in your practice of managing that team, but also, are there any key benefits that you've noticed about a structure like that?
Well, man, how much time do we have? I mean, I would definitely say building a law practice and finding where you should be spending your time is definitely art and science, right? And that's going to be earned over time through trial by fire. When I arrived at Calfee, I was the only person in the IM practice. Today, we've got 8 other folks, 9 total, that are really dedicated to the compliance part of that practice and that have been part of the build. Two other attorneys and 6 non-attorneys. So I'm right at like a kind of an inflection point in that process where absolutely, like, I am continuing to focus more of my time now with a group that size on activities that I would likely attribute to more of like a CEO, chief administrator, and maybe a little bit of a CMO, chief marketing officer kind of stature. Now, I'm still doing a lot of the technical work. I'm still involved in some of the more significant kind of, larger client relationships. But absolutely, like, I've been able to start to have a structure, kind of a delegation of authority type structure where I have other folks on the team that are of the chief compliance officer ilk, right? And so then they are ultimately managing, 3 to 4 compliance officers, right? And I would say we're going to continue to expand the team this year in 26 by bringing in not only people that are of a senior level, but even probably some other folks that might be even more at the entry level, right? And so far, as we've been building out the team, I would say most of our hires have been either mid-tier, they already had some experience coming in, or more senior level. And I think as we continue to expand, my duties are going to be less in the some of the kind of technical legal counseling side and more on the kind of executive administration side, because our little group within the firm is getting big enough now that it's just the demands on the time kind of necessitate that I do that.
How do you find a difference between managing non-lawyers and lawyers?
Another great question. I mean, there are certainly lots of elements that I would say are really, really similar. And, some of that is people are always going to have idiosyncratic stuff about what's going on in their personal lives. And that's something too that I have certainly become more attuned to, that like, hey, I ask a lot of our employees, and I expect really high performance. Now, I also give a lot, and I am always more than willing to like link arms with them so they never feel like they're on an island. Even though I'm asking a lot of them, I'm absolutely going to link arms with them and provide them with all the support they need, no matter what time of day it is or whatever the situation may call for. I would say the biggest difference between the two, so like in most ways they're the same. The biggest difference between the two is attorneys, they come out of law school or they come over from a law firm or they come over from an in-house position, and they know how to keep their time. And they know about tracking their time in a way that is super meaningful. They've been expecting it their whole, right, like at least at the end of their educational lives. they've been expecting, like, when I get out and I start working, I'm going to have to keep my time, you know, usually in 6-minute increments. For some folks, maybe they did it in 10 or 15-minute increments, depending on where they're at. But they at least recognize that and the significant value of that. For folks that are non-attorney types, that's, you know, they didn't sign up for this. They didn't go to law school. They've never really had to do that in a meaningful way. So that tends to be an initial challenge. And then ultimately, even they see the significant value in it. And a lot of that is too, because we have a lot of relationships right now with our clients where we are working on retainer, right? So they just pay us an annual kind of flat fee retainer type of relationship. And we're basically on call for them, right? And so by keeping our time, it's super helpful for us. We know where we're spending our resources. It's super helpful for the clients. They know how they're utilizing us and the value that they're getting. And so there's all kinds of wins around keeping the time, but for non-attorneys, that can be a bit of a struggle.
Do you struggle with managing people whose jobs you couldn't do? I actually found it easier because I was never tempted to go in and, hey, let me do the food safety part of this because let him near that.
Yeah. I would say I'm pretty comfortable with it. I think my whole pitch when I'm talking with other folks that are interested in potentially like joining our team and the work they're going to get to do, it's not only do you get to get all of that sexy stuff I talked about earlier about like you become a trusted partner, you get a seat at the table, you're working with the C-suite, you're working with entrepreneurs, you're helping them live their dreams, you know, but then also like I say to them, and law firms tend to run, most law firms tend to run pretty lean, right? Bend, but don't break, from resources.
Staff for the valleys, not the peaks.
Yes, right, exactly. So we're already built in a similar way like that. So I tell them, I'm not going to like have the time to micromanage the stuff that you're doing. And you're going to get to fly. And you're going to like, from day one, we just had a woman start with us who was a UC Law grad, a fantastic woman who externed with us for a while and then ultimately came on board, and she's communicating with clients on a day-to-day basis. How many other first-year attorneys out there are talking directly to the clients on a day-to-day? They're calling her, right? Which is great for me. Like, by all means, like, have at it. But I tell them, look, you're going to get super sophisticated, nuanced, experience and expertise right away. You're going to have direct communications with the client. You're going to be able to do all of that stuff. And we're going to support you, of course, throughout it. We're going to absolutely, because we're, the law is still an apprenticeship model by nature most of the time. And so we're going to be here to help you with that. But ultimately, multiples of my team right now have developed skills in areas that I, wouldn't be able to emulate if I had to. And so I'm super glad that they have the skills and I'm able to effectively rely on that without kind of micromanaging.
Let's talk a little bit about your clients and the challenges of working with them and the opportunities. Wait, there's no challenges. There's only opportunities, right?
Yes, correct.
How do you get them to view your services as strategic rather than defensive? Or do you pitch it as, I'm here to help you build a strong wall so that the barbarians are never going to crash the gate?
Great analogy. It's classic lawyer hedge. Here we go, right? But it really is both. I would say some of it kind of depends on the mental state or mens rea, if I can quote another legal fun term, of the clients themselves and what they are looking for in a partner. But in reality, I would say most of the time, I'm able to show them the value of the partnership. You asked me at the top of the pod today, what's my role? And like, how do I value, or how do clients value the stuff that I'm doing? Probably, if I could go back and add to that answer, it's the quarterback of the offense. But in this case, the offense is all of their legal and compliance. And so it is more strategic for them because what I'm saying is, back to that question, Brett, when you ask me, how do I approach clients? I want to know what their ultimate goal is. You tell me what your ultimate goal is, and I'm going to be able to help get you there. We're going to figure out what that plan forward looks like. So I'm a part of that strategic build from the jump and really helping to quarterback that in a way that's super meaningful. To use like another analogy in a different area of law that people appreciate, people that have ever had an estate plan done, but don't have any experience in estate planning, understand the value of having an estate planner who like sits there and quarterbacks your entire life, right, in a couple of different key areas and helps balance that and moves things around and tells you what the impact of that's going to be. And in this case, I'm working not with people's personal stuff, although sometimes maybe it's involved, but it's their business, right? But I'm kind of doing the same thing and providing that high level of counseling. So I do think it is more strategic, but of course, they very much appreciate the fact that when the barbarians are going to start approaching the gates, they've got an active defense that's ready to go and can step up and help make sure to put them in the best position possible.
But it's somewhat easier to convince people that there's some possibility they might die someday than that they might need a proper compliance plan.
Well said. The thing that I should have added that helps give that same kind of impression, and I haven't talked about this yet, so this is a good entree to talk a little bit about the investment management practice itself. But it's built around, and I mentioned the Advisors Act earlier. So there is a rule under the Advisors Act. Poor Brett has heard, he sat and ate lunch in my office and had to hear me droll on about this for probably a good 90 minutes already. So sorry for the duplicative, conversation here. But there's a statute called the Compliance Rule, 20647 under the Advisors Act. And it basically says three things, right? If you are an investment advisor and you take money to, provide advice concerning securities, a different part of the Advisors Act rule, you have to have a compliance. You have to, one, have a chief compliance officer, two, have policies and procedures designed to prevent violations of federal securities law, and you have to review those policies annually and make sure that they are effective. Man, that's why I exist. Because most financial advisors, most investment advisors, they don't want to do that stuff, but they have to do it. And not only do they have to do it, but the SEC examines anywhere from 15 to 20% of the investment advisor population that's registered at the federal level every year. With state advisors, oftentimes those numbers can be even higher, right? But at the federal level, the SEC is examining 15 to 20% of advisors. Most of our clients are at the federal level. And so that means every 6 to 8 years, like paying taxes, you can count on the SEC being inside your office, right? So not only do you have to have this thing, but at least every, half dozen years, someone that is an existential threat is going to come in and check and make sure you're doing it. So that's why, to your point, I can exist.
The first draft of the outline, sorry, Brett, I'm going to pick on you now. Brett wrote down, do clients view reviews by the SEC as a diagnostic opportunity or as a threat? And I said, oh my God, there is no GC client or anyone else in the world that goes, goody, the SEC is here. Let's find out how we're doing.
Yeah, no, you're right. Brett, maybe I should recruit you harder for the compliance practices. You're doing a great job of selling this with, some of our folks. I will say, I have found that the examination process, while scary for some that haven't been through it, to the kind of idea that Brett was putting forward, is such an incredible tool that you can use in your practice, not only to build stronger relationships with that client, but ultimately probably to get them to better understand the value that you bring to their business, right? There is no greater kind of appreciation that I have felt across my career than when you have an advisor that's in the middle of an examination and then they reach out to us and we go in and help them through that. Or even if they were a client from day one, let's say they hired us, we helped build their program from the jump, but then 2 or 3 years into their business going live, their independent firm going live, they have an exam. When they see the value of that process, man, do they love and appreciate you so much for helping them through that. And it can, the other point that you're alluding to there, Brett, that's interesting is, we give advice to clients on the best way to do things, but ultimately, a lot of times they still weigh, well, okay, I see what you're saying, but there's still significant benefit to doing that thing. So I'm going to eat the business risk and I'm going to do it. Right. Now, when they go through an audit, and a lot of times some of the stuff that you may have said to them on like, hey, you might have wanted to do this thing differently, that's another tool, which again, I think helps further cement and foster the positive relationship that you have with that client. Because they say, my goodness, like, yeah, like you had told me early on that we should have kind of done this approach versus that approach. And that was one of the things they noted as a deficiency. And, or, it provides you with an opportunity to help improve and enhance and refine. Those are all verbs I love using with clients, their compliance programs, right, in a way that's going to be super meaningful and ultimately continue to really drive home the collaboration and the relationship with the client.
And it's a huge difference from your earlier litigation practice because, win or lose, many clients' favorite day is getting to say goodbye to their litigator, right?
Yes.
I've had clients like, oh, thank you so much. I can't believe we got that summary judgment. That's so awesome. Hope to never see you.
You couldn't be more right. That is a very astute observation, and one that I didn't know was going to be present when I got into the practice, because really my first foray into the practice was in that in-house role, which is like, womp, womp, here comes the compliance guy, right? In the in-house role, I respect the heck out of the in-house CCOs and compliance officers and other folks, because those businesses, unfortunately, often look at that area like a cost center. When then I went back out into private practice and I'm working with these entrepreneurs and these innovators and these other folks that are at these other large companies, and I'm the external counsel, and I'm helping really, again, be that trusted partner to like help them achieve this dream that they've had for their professional life. They smile when you show up, right? Like they're so enthused to see you. And more often than not, they also heed your advice, right? In a way that's super meaningful. Of course, they push back on stuff. Like we have lots of folks that I would describe more of the cowboy, cowgirl ilk than some folks that are always going to be staying within the lines of where they should be. On the whole, couldn't be more right. They are super excited to see you and enthused you're there.
And the in-house people, you're going to be appearing on the symposium, March 6th, 2026. Get
Yep.
your tickets now. And, one of the things we're talking about is how do you build an effective compliance program? And it's aimed both at attorneys like you in private practice, but also at in-house counsel. Because I remember as a chief ethics and compliance officer at a big company, if I walked into the CEO's office, his color would drain out of his face, and he'd say, "Dear God, what has happened?" And it'd be like, "You invited me to lunch?" And he's like, "Oh, yeah. But that's just, that's the daily existence of a compliance officer. At one place I worked, they put Darth Vader's Death March on as my ringtone, so people would know if I was around. And it's just finding that way that the compliance team and supporting them so that they are seen internally as,
For sure,
adding value, and not just, oh, here comes that greatest pain in the with something else.
Oh, that, and I've used this phrase a couple times today. We get to know each other better. Brett knows this already. I'm basically a bad broken record. I just say the same stuff over and over again, as well as a bunch of movie quotes from the 90s and the early aughts. But it's an art and a science. And even when I was in-house, and I absolutely recommend this to any of the in-house chief legal officers, GCs, deputy general counsels, or the chief compliance officers and compliance officers that we work with. You want, because there are those big divisions inside an investment advisor firm that are generally on the other side of the advice you're getting. So like marketing and advertising is probably the biggest, but then there's a lot of other areas. And so what I think can be super effective, because you're right, by the way, the Darth Vader music would be awesome. I may actually recommend that some of our clients start to play that when we're walking around, because I like that. That's pretty good. But it's like, when they need something, it is going to the mat for them in a way so that there are like little micro wins that you can get with them. Like you have to have a process, and I'll use marketing and advertising. It's the easiest, and it's certainly one of the ways where I'd say this dynamic occurs the most. When someone reaches out with a piece of marketing, let's say, most of the time they follow the process. We say we're going to get stuff back to you within 48 to 72 hours, but then, they've got a piece and it comes in and it's a really exigent, situation. You got to, take a little extra time at work, or maybe after you put the kids down that night, like get back on the computer and knock that piece out for them. You going to the mat for them and showing that you care about what it is that they do, even in an in-house capacity, is so important to feel like you are invested in them and they are invested in you. And that's what I tell in-house people all the time, which is that when you're having those conversations, like try to get those micro wins so that those other business constituencies understand that you are invested in what it is that they're doing. And also, if we want them to be successful, like the marketing team to be successful, if they're not successful, we may not be around very long, right? And the firm is not going to have this success. And I mean, goodness knows that like oftentimes cost centers are the first things cut when a business. So like we absolutely need and want them to be successful. We want them to understand that we are invested in their success and opportunities. And so we will go a little bit of the extra mile to help them understand that. And I think ultimately then when you push back on some of the stuff that they're doing, they'll know you're not just doing it to be a stick in the mud, that you're doing it for a purpose, that it's well-intentioned, and then, ultimately you can collaborate and work together to find the right landing spot.
You mentioned earlier that you've got some Wild West clients, cowboys and the cowgirls.
Yeah.
How do you set a minimum standard so that you know that they're doing enough that if something goes wrong, they're not going to sink your ship along with theirs?
Absolutely. So there's probably two different ways that we approach it and make sure to have a baseline. I mean, from the jump, again, the nice part for us is our area of focus with, again, kind of those four principal statutes of Securities Act, Exchange Act, Company Act, and primarily the Advisors Act is narrow enough that we know, okay, here's the baseline foundation that we need, especially in your kind of compliance manual policies and procedures for you to effectively run your firm. The other thing that's interesting, and this is a little bit nerdy, but I'll add it because I think it's helpful. If you are an investment advisor, you have to meet a fiduciary standard of care across all of the advisory activities that you're serving. The reason for that, and it's actually really cool to think about, like historically, coming out of the Great Depression, coming out of the Black Friday and the Great Collapse, people realized if you handle money, and especially if you're handling other people's money, there should be a different set of rules that applies to you. Like that's a special role. It's kind of like being an attorney, right? When you're an attorney, you are bound by this code of ethics, right? Like we have to act in our client's best interest. We have to do what's right for them. It is a fiduciary standard level of care. The same is true for investment advisors. And so, ultimately, when they want to engage in something and we recognize, wow, that's a conflict, what you're doing seems to be putting the firm's interests or your personal interests ahead of the client's interests. Tell me why you think we can do that, right? Like substantiate that for me. Rather than being accusatory, I'm inquisitive, right? So by being inquisitive, for those that love Ted Lasso, they'll probably love that. But there's a bar scene where he's talking to the prior owner of the soccer club. Maybe you should have been a little bit more curious, right?
And yet, even the best dart player, I've spent many, many hours playing darts, and there's no way I'm going to throw in three triple 20s on the last.
Yeah, right. Yeah, no, there's certainly a suspension of. But by being inquisitive with my clients, when they want to engage in a new type of activity or initiative, I can rely on that. I simply ask them, like, how are we still meeting our fiduciary standard of care there? How are we putting our client's best interest first? And there are some situations where we're not. And then the other thing that comes into play is, okay, well then disclosure in advisor land, as I often refer to my team who, as they listen to this podcast, will probably tell them to drink, right? They've like drinking games for the phrases I use all the time. In advisor land, disclosure is about as close to a panacea as you can get. It doesn't cure all, but it's pretty darn close. So first, I go back to the fiduciary standard of care and make sure that they can substantiate how they're acting in their client's best interest. In those situations where it's not, where it is going to be something that does continue to be in the firm's interest over clients or in their personal interests over clients, then we need to disclose that in a way that's meaningful so that the clients, you provide full and fair disclosure so the clients are able to effectively acknowledge that and still want to work with you anyway.
You ever have to fire a client?
Once. Yeah, it was. And actually, it was a situation where I was asked to serve. This was I was in private practice at this point, obviously, and I was asked by the consulting firm I was at the time to start working with this client. They said, they're really great. You're going to love working with them. Started working with them, and I realized like early on, like within a week, there were some advisory activities that I felt like were already falling outside of the allowable activities under the Advisors Act. And so I escalated this. It wasn't met with the kind of response I would have wanted. And they were asking me to step into the role of chief compliance officer for them. I hadn't yet done that, but I basically said, I'm not able to effectively step into that role if you cannot, if you're going to go continue down this path without doing XYZ thing. And so ultimately I had to resign. They ended up doing it. It wasn't a gloating moment, like in any way. A couple years later, there was an enforcement action related to that specific person. So I felt good that my governor wasn't completely off, just from, you sometimes you do wonder, you're like, am I this far off that I'm like missing the mark here?
Right.
But in that particular case, it seemed to be on the money.
So for all the rest of your clients who stay above that line, or other people's clients even, I'm sure all your clients are great. What separates a compliance program that looks good on paper from one that's truly effective? I understand that's a massive question.
No.
We'll just let you roll for half hour.
I think I can actually, yeah, right, exactly. How much time you got? No, but I actually think one of the things that I tell people up front, like from day one when we start working together, is that when you find things that aren't going perfectly in your compliance program, that's okay. To me, the hallmark of a really good compliance program is one that is identifying issues, mitigating them where possible, and remediating them if problems have occurred, right? And then trying to prevent them from happening again. And I actually talked about this on my own podcast. So for those that haven't fallen asleep yet and are actually interested in this practice area, go check out the securities compliance podcast. But we talked about this in an episode once where there's this really cool aspect of acoustic engineering. And I talked about this like, well, how does that relate to compliance, right? Well, this aspect of acoustic engineering is when you go to a lot of public parks or go to a lot of public spaces, you will often find a fountain there, right? You'll see a fountain there. That's not by accident, because when you have a fountain in like a big public space, like a library or something like that, it provides that white noise. It provides that like background noise so that people you will often see in those spaces are meeting, they're huddling, they're connecting, they're talking. Whereas if you go into a room or to a park and there's no fountain there or there's nothing else happening, you can hear every little pin drop, right? And like every little conversation in a way that it actually discourages people from talking to each other and from engaging with each other in a way that's like super meaningful. And so I talked about on the podcast how like in a compliance program, You finding deficiencies at different times, that's the acoustic engineering, right? Like that's the fountain at the park. That's showing the SEC who's going to come in and look at your program. Hey, we've got a really good compliance program running here, right? Because we're trying really hard. We have a really good manual built. We have policies and procedures. We're generally speaking, we're effectively following those. But even in some situations, because of extenuating circumstances, we fall a little bit short, or we might miss things, or there might be human error involved. But when that happens, our program finds it, and that's okay, right? If I see a compliance program and they don't find anything wrong with it, like it's running perfectly, my immediate thought, and most SEC examiners' thought would be, their program's not very good. Because a really good program, you're always going to find stuff. You know, it's kind of like the mail, right? And Newman from Seinfeld, like it just keeps coming. like it's good. There's going to be something that comes up. And so the best programs in the world understand that they can't stop every mistake from happening, but having a really good compliance program understands that when you have a mistake, you're going to be able to identify it, that you can mitigate it as much as possible, remediate the issue if anything unfortunate has happened, and then identify solutions to help prevent it from happening again.
Yeah, I think the best, in my opinion, the best compliance plans develop a tolerance for low-level line crossing.
Yeah.
Meaning that they don't say, oh, it's great, we only violated the law a little, just ignore it. But what they do is have a culture that people understand that, you know, non-catastrophic mistakes are okay.
That's right.
And bring them up because we don't have Darth Vader around, you know, to chop off the head of anybody who has a tiny little misstep. And I think if you have a culture that is, you know, fear-based,
correct,
you will never get there.
Correct.
Because people won't bring up the low-level things that are going to turn into big things if they're unaddressed.
That is such an astute observation. We try to communicate that with our folks all the time. So Calfee does a couple different things in the way that we deliver our advisory services with folks. We certainly can serve as the chief compliance officer and kind of do everything, right? We also have a service level where we're just a support, like a back office support for the in-house chief compliance officer, and really helping them run their programs and helping them with anything that they need. We tell them all the time, like, you don't want to rule out of this like draconian, like you do something wrong, you step out of line, like you're going to feel the wrath kind of a situation. Do you have to have rules in place? Absolutely. Do you need to hold people accountability? Absolutely. But you do so in a way that provides support and helping them identify, okay, why did this error occur? Why did we fall out of line? What happened here? And how can we remediate it? If people are scared to come to you or fear of what's going to happen, or back to your earlier point, Neil, you know, like if you are not going to the mat for those, like if you're in-house and you're going to the mat for those other constituencies, then they're also less likely to reach out to you even when they're supposed to, right? Because they're like, man, all this guy, that Hayes guy, you know, all this guy does is gum up my ability to get marketing out. Whereas if you're like, no, like, hey, like, let me work with you. And in fact, we've often found, like, and again, in an area like marketing, some of the compliance reviews can actually help enhance the messaging to clients and like help it come off in a way that the readership of that message is really going to engage with it in a way that is more meaningful.
I'm going to give it back to Brett because you and I are going to have been dominating here just a little bit.
Good.
So I'll shut up for a minute. We'll see how long it lasts. I'll time myself.
So you mentioned that you started the Securities Compliance Podcast. I believe that was in 2020, right?
Correct.
So what inspired you to start that podcast, and how has it influenced your own practice?
Man, I love this question. So for those, this is probably 10 to 12 years back now. So one, I've long been a consumer of the podcast medium. I love it. When I graduated law school, and I mentioned I went into litigation, that sometimes involves what can feel like endless discovery, right? And review of documents and materials. I started listening to podcasts sometimes in the background, right? As I would just do stuff because I'm reviewing, you know, specific documents and looking for specific things. Anyway, I started to consume stuff in that way. And then I remember watching, it was a Super Bowl. I don't remember which one it was. It's probably 10, 12 years ago now. And I saw my first ever masterclass commercial. And it was like one of those first ones that the masterclass that they had where there were like violins playing in the background and they would show all these like absolute top of their fields folks like doing the violin and negotiations and business and sports and like all this other stuff. And I was like, that is so awesome. Like, I love that. And I started to think like that would be really cool to create something because there wasn't anything out there for somebody that was in my field, right? Investment management is such a niche practice area to begin with. And so I thought like I had that all of a sudden, like I had the itch, like I really want to do something. Also because let's be honest, I was just an English major, right? I was an English nerd to begin with. I've wanted to create my whole life and now I'm stuck in an attorney's body. And so I gotta figure out some kind of creative outlet to do that. So then in addition to that, I had started doing work with and was tapping into that English degree and writing for the publications committee of the National Society of Compliance Professionals. So they had a publication called Currents. It's a fantastic publication for anybody that is, again, in this space and maybe listening to this podcast. I would highly recommend it. But I had been doing some of that writing. And so the one thing that I love more than anything about podcast and the medium itself is it's such a perfect way to meet people where they are. They don't, people's lives get crazy. I've got 3 girls, right? 8, 4, and 3. And like the idea that then like I can like quickly pivot and like go to somebody who's giving a lecture or doing other stuff like that is just so difficult. But if I can do it on a podcast, well, then when I'm at home making dinner for the girls or cutting the grass or raking some leaves, whatever that case might be, right? I can just plug in and immediately tap into getting that same level of detail and content and stuff that again, people appreciating is super meaningful, but do it in a way that's going to allow them to fit it into their schedule. And so ultimately, I teamed up with the National Society of Compliance Professionals. I said, hey, I'd love to do this. They had probably heard me droll on about doing it for so long that they finally just relented and gave in and said, all right, okay, we get it. Like, yeah, you can do it. And so, yeah, started that in 2020 and we are in season 6 of the podcast now. And we've done probably 75 to 85 episodes. So been good run.
So you've kind of touched on the boom that society's kind of seeing right now surrounding podcasting and all the different avenues that you can take with that. Do you see podcasting and other forms of informal education like that becoming more prevalent in a professional setting and kind of educating, especially lawyers and things like that?
Absolutely. I mean, the way that I would look at it is, and certainly, the COVID shutdown and in the years after that, people recognize that there are other tools that they can have at their disposal to help other people learn and identify some of the technical skills associated with that specific subject matter. Ultimately, if when you have things like a podcast, people can receive that information. What's interesting, or that I think you would need to have if you were to ever use it in more of the like curriculum kind of educational sense, is you'd have to have then some follow-up by which to like test or hold people accountable to receiving that information in a way that they're going to actually appreciate and understand it. And the biggest thing that I think is missing in this, again, is like a hallmark of kind of the legal profession, and one where like I love that, most of my team, right? So we're a team of 9. We are in different cities, but 6 of us sit here in Cincinnati. And, it's so great. I think the major learning occurs not just when they receive the information, but then in the back and forth and the dialogue and in the continued kind of ongoing questions that they have as a result of that. Like, I love the podcast medium because it is such a great way to provide information, to start conversations. But that's what I hope it does. I hope it leads to additional conversations. And I think even in an educational sense, if you were going to use it like that, I would want an additional forum where there can be that, intellectual kind of meeting of minds and conversation that occurs over that subject matter.
For the kind of the last segment of this podcast, I want to tailor it towards advice from you to law students and young legal professionals. For somebody like myself that's about to graduate, about to kind of start their own practice, how do you recommend setting up that practice in such a way that you're able to maintain the passion that you have for your clients and for the work itself?
Yeah.
I don't think passion's been a big problem for Patrick. That's just me.
People may or may not have used that term or enthusiastic as an adjective from time to time. So number one is, and I can actually use my own career as a perfect example of this. I mentioned earlier that I started off in litigation. Again, I learned a lot in litigation, and there's a lot of skills that I loved. I joke with I tease my litigation colleagues now that I'm a reformed litigator, right? So I don't not to hold it, but in all seriousness, I just knew that I mentioned that there are two different types of attorneys, right? There are advocates and there are counselors. And I think my first piece of advice would be, as you're going through law school, or even as you go out into private practice or whatever your job is post education, start to identify which one of those roles you think you prefer, right? Do you prefer the advocacy side? Super important, right? And that can bleed into lots of different areas. It's not just litigation. It can be labor and employment. It can be constitutional law. It can be immigration law. It can be there's lots of different areas where an advocate is necessary. Or do you prefer the role of counselor? Because that in and of itself is going to help you. Again, the other analogy I used back to the bad broken record part, you're chipping away at the areas of law that you don't think are going to be a great fit for you personally. And so you find out whether or not you kind of prefer the advocacy side or the counselor side. And then inside of whichever one of those roles, the practice areas if you find in law school the area that you love and are passionate about, pursue it, right? Full speed ahead. Let's hit the accelerator. But if you haven't found it, one, don't fret. Take peace of mind that that's okay. And then simply start to do some of the work in those areas. And ultimately, I do think you will find one that fulfills you more than others, right? A key part of that for me was, and it came up briefly earlier, but certain areas of law tend to steer you towards being more of a generalist or more of a deep subject matter expert, right? And so my area, even though it's under corporate law, and I would say corporate law is an area where you find lots of folks that succeed as generalists in the corporate arena, my specific area is definitely more of just a very niche subject matter expert. And I realized that one of the things that I found fulfilling was having that deep subject matter expertise in one really specific area and being able to help answer anybody's questions related to that subject matter. The last thing that I would say is, and again, this gets to the advocacy and counselor side, I also realized early on, I love the build, right? I love the build, and I love being part of that kind of strategic level counsel that I'm providing to folks as they're looking to build their businesses, right? Get from A to B to C and go long term. And so, the advice would be, would you rather be an advocate or a counselor? Inside those roles, would you rather be a generalist or kind of a deep subject matter expert, right? And then really understanding inside of the counsel you're providing, what is it that you find most fulfilling? For me, it was the build. And so that's why this area is such a perfect fit for me. It sounds weird because I'm sure when I was in kindergarten, I wasn't saying to myself, I can't wait to be a compliance officer when I get older, right? But honestly, being part of that process now and part of that build for a lot of these firms that are looking to go independent and start their own shop it's so cool. Absolutely. It's the juice that gets me out of bed.
We did have a guest on another episode who's a corporate lawyer whose father was a corporate lawyer, which meant she didn't want to do it at all. But she does remember dinner table conversations when she was 6 about corporate law.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah.
So some 6-year-olds do have to think about corporate law.
Right? Exactly. Yeah. That's funny.
So, just one final question from me, and it's kind of focused on time management. You're a partner at Calfee, you're chair of your practice area, you run a podcast on the side, among all the other things that you do. How do you look at your work-life balance and kind of how do you approach that area?
Yeah. Great question. The phrase that I would say is do the things that are going to fill your cup, right? So, and when I mean fill your cup, I mean what is going to make you feel good both professionally and personally. If you do, if you're going to volunteer, like I volunteered a lot when I was, especially as a younger attorney, kids, the volunteer time was much higher. But like whether that's with the Cincinnati Bar Association, I used to do stuff with Pro Kids. There's lots of great organizations obviously out there that you can do lots of stuff with. So if you're going to do that because you love that specific nonprofit, that charity, that mission, whatever that civic organization is doing, do it because you're passionate about that. Because if you're passionate about that thing, their mission, then it's super easy to go to those board meetings. It's super easy to go to those the volunteer committees and other stuff like that. If you're only doing something because you think it's going to be a resume builder, you're a lot less likely to enjoy those meetings. You're a lot less likely to look for those. You're a lot less likely to go to those meetings where you're only doing it as like, oh, like I've got to go do this thing, and like I think I need to volunteer because I think it's going to look good on a resume. Like, especially with the extra time that you have, devote it towards stuff that you're passionate about. The other thing that I would say, and this is like a thing about the podcast that I love, is it like I needed to scratch an itch creatively. It's like I'm just dying in compliance, right? All day long. Like, oh my gosh, all these rules and regs. Like, I got to find something else to like let some of these creative juices go out. Um, and at the same time, that was an outlet for me, but it was also something that could enhance my career, right? And that could elevate the stuff that I was doing and that could even help sharpen my technical expertise in different areas. Like I say all the time, like, I don't know jack, man. I just bring on other smart people to talk about this stuff and it's great. I just get to, pilfer all off of them. It's awesome, right? And so like, if you can find for your professional career, I would say, find those things that one are going to fill your cup for what it is you're interested in, but then, potentially can also help you elevate your specific practice. And then personally, there's lots of really good, sayings and philosophies and proverbs out there about, whatever you water in your life, that's the stuff that's going to grow, right? So if you're going to spend your time, there's no greater gift than to spend your time doing something. So why spend it on something that you don't enjoy and aren't passionate about when it comes to some of the other volunteerism or civic or charitable stuff that you're doing?
Awesome. Thank you.
So we are just over our goal of staying under an hour, but it happens a lot. I just want to thank you for your time. It's been a lot of fun. Anything closing that we missed? We provided an outline in advance. At this point, I never know if I've covered half of it or not. Is there anything that you wanted to talk about that we've elided?
Yeah, no, appreciate that. The only thing that I would say is for those folks that are listening to this podcast that are either existing, current students at UC or alums from UC, I would continue to stump. I was a longtime board member and then chair of the UC Law Alumni Association. I really respect that group and the work that they do. For those alums that are out there, continue to get involved. I mean, again, just being up at the school, it always energizes me to be among the students and with the professors and kind of other, folks that are up here. So push that. But then also, if you're a student right now, don't hesitate to reach out to the alums. I think sometimes it can feel like there's a bit of a gate there between like, oh, I don't want to bother them. And look, I'll be honest, my inbox is a dumpster fire most days, right? Doesn't mean that I won't ever like that. I always get back to folks. And like, I think alumni are super interested in helping to find new ways to give back to the current students. And so I would just encourage folks, like, don't hesitate to reach out. Like, I would love to continue to help anybody, especially, my UC Law brethren, brothers and sisters out there as they're continuing to evaluate what their next steps look like. And so I would just highly encourage folks to do that. And Again, thank you both so much for having me back on. It was a wonderful experience, and look forward to staying connected.
Well, and you mentioned that you have someone that is now full-time that started as an extern. You're taking 2 more externs this semester, and we really appreciate the support and completely agree. For all the UC Law alums out there, there are ways to be involved other than just your money, but we'll take your money.
Of course, right? It's we do not discriminate in the ways in which you can continue to come back and engage with the law school. But no, that's great. And thank you for having me, and looking forward to the symposium.
Yeah. We'll see in about, well, I don't know. This will go out a few weeks before the symposium.
Okay.
So everybody, if you've enjoyed this, please come to the symposium. If you haven't enjoyed this, come heckle us at the symposium. That'd be great. All right. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That was fun.
That was great.